Welcome everybody to Moving to Small Town, Texas. Today we're going to talk about 3 pros and 3 cons of living in Pilot Point, Texas. Hey everybody, you're watching Moving to Small Town, Texas. My name's Chance Kirby, and today we're going to talk about the 3 pros and the 3 cons of moving and living in Pilot Point, Texas. This show is going to be a little too close to home. I'm 5th generation Pilot Point resident. My family's been in this area for over 100 years, and I've been selling real estate in this area for over 30 years. So here we go. Okay, so let's start with the cons. Number 3, working our way down to number 1, I'm going to start with the isolation, meaning that one of the beautiful things about living in a small town is being far away from everything, but with that comes some situations that you may not run into living in a larger town or at least a larger area. We're about 10 miles from the nearest Starbucks. Now, some of you may think Starbucks is the greatest coffee ever, some of you may not, but I say that because if you'll think about areas that you've been in the United States and how far it is to a Starbucks, because it seems like when I go to town, they're on every corner. Like I said, when you get to Pilot Point, you are isolated from some things that if you're in a bigger town that may have become comfortable to you. So that's something that I think people need to consider, that most likely if you're living in this town, you're going to be driving someplace else to work. Do you want to deal with that drive and that drive time? Although I have noticed that if people look at drive time versus mileage, they might find that driving from Pilot Point to the Metroplex is actually shorter in time than it would be from where they came from before if they lived in a high traffic area. But that is one of the cons that I've had people mention when they are moving to this area or have lived in this area for a while. Number 2 is kind of related to number 1, is the lack of food options in Pilot Point. Now there are some great restaurants in Pilot Point, and I'm not taking anything away from them. I eat at all of them all the time. But after you've moved to Pilot Point and you've lived here for 6 months to a year, you have made your rounds through all of those restaurants multiple times, and you will and your family will have the conversation, well, what are we going to eat tonight? And then everyone will have an opinion that they don't want to eat the same thing they've been eating for the past 6 months. And then to go somewhere different or have some variety, you're looking at driving 10 to 15 miles to the south to find something that's different than what you're eating at or eating with all the time. So again, it's back to distance in number 1, but I do want you to understand that with living in a small town, for everything that you gain, you are giving some things up, and that is definitely distance and convenience for restaurants and driving to work and other things like that. And then the number 1 con in living in Pilot Point is there's a railroad track that runs through the center of town. Now, that in itself is not a big problem, but I have noticed that people that live here do comment and mention that they have issues with the train making noise and just the fact that the train comes through town. I do not have a strong statistic, but I think I can comfortably say there are 15 to 20 trains at least that go through Pilot Point every day. And then it is federal law that the train blows its horn 3 times at every intersection that it goes by. Well, when the train comes through the center of town, it's crossing several intersections as it's coming through. So if you'll see on the photo there of the drone shot, the west side of town is what we would call across the tracks. So if you live in a house or you buy a property that is on that side of town, more times than not, you're going to have an issue with the train. Like I said, that's not a deal killer. I don't remember in my life of living here the train shutting down and blocking all the intersections, or if it did, it didn't do long enough for me to notice. But you will have your life disrupted to some degree by the train if you live on the west side of town. And also the noise of the train, whether that be the horn or the engine. I've never lived anywhere in Pilot Point that I didn't hear it. I don't notice it, but I do know and have heard comments of people that have moved to this area that have asked questions about the train and have had issues with the train. Now we got those cons out of the way, let's talk about the 3 positives of living in Pilot Point, Texas. Like I said earlier in the show, I've lived here my whole life. Family's been here 100 years. I've had my office here for almost 30 years, and there are hundreds of reasons that I believe that Pilot Point is the best place to live and a great place to live, but I've narrowed it down to 3. And what I want to start with, and we will call that number 3, is the distance. And I know you're thinking to yourself, well, you just said that's a con. And it is for some, but I personally think that it's a positive. And the reason being is you're just far enough away that shopping malls, Starbucks, like I said earlier, and the conveniences that you're used to in a larger community are just 10 to 15 miles away. And the beauty of it is you can go down there and get in the traffic and get in that to get what you need, but then you get to get out of it and come back home and come back to Pilot Point. And personally, like I said, I've listed that as a con, but I also think that you can turn that one around and make that a positive as well. Number 2, which may surprise you, being it's a small town Texas in a rural area, is Pilot Point's actually a very artistic community. Whether that be the several murals that we have on the downtown square, the music scene that's on the square, or out on Massey Road, there's a place called Lizzie Gator, which honestly I don't really know how to describe it to you other than it is an art compound. I do have a link down in the description below providing you with more information about that site. But it's definitely a place you need to check out, and certainly something that makes Pilot Point unique and is a definite advantage to live in Pilot Point. The number 1 pro as far as living in Pilot Point has to be Lake Ray Roberts. The endless opportunities for recreation that it involves, and there on your screen now is a link to a previous video I've done on 5 things you may or may not know about Lake Ray Roberts. But in summary, a lake and the Lake Ray Roberts is a big part of Pilot Point and its community, whether that be fishing, biking, running, mountain biking, camping. It all offers a tremendous amount of opportunity and joy that is not available in every other small town. The lake is literally the shores of the lake are literally right there at Pilot Point. I personally spend a lot of time out there just looking at wildlife and just enjoying all that the park has to offer. Well, that's this show. Thank you for watching Moving to Small Town Texas. If you have further questions about Pilot Point or any other show on our channel that you've watched, my contact information is down in the description below. Feel free to reach out to me. I'd love to talk to you and tell you more about this area or any other area that you have an interest in. If you wouldn't mind liking this video or liking my other videos or subscribing to my channel, it would be a great help. And until next time, I'm Chance Kirby, and you've been watching Moving to Small Town Texas.